Elias and Arthur were two monumental forces rooted in the Viridian lands, a patrimony that stretched across the heart of the Shenandoah Valley. They were the fifth generation of Viridian men, bearing the inherited weight of their ancestors' toil, their hands permanently stained by the deep, complex earth of their orchards and fields. They were bound by blood and land, yet separated by temperament. Elias, the elder, embodied the relentless pull of the past. He was precision, calculation, and granite-like certainty. His life was mapped by tradition, his fields were mathematically straight, his annual yield journals were meticulous records of profit and failure dating back to 1910, and his opinions were as fixed as the North Star. Elias believed deeply that order was moral, and any deviation from the established, proven path was not merely inefficient, it was a betrayal of the legacy. His love was expressed through maintenance. His criticism was delivered through cold, surgical logic. Arthur was a study in restless motion, a man driven by the fierce, impulsive heat of creativity. He was the first to adopt new machinery, the first to experiment with crossbreeding, always seeking the spectacular 10% gain that lay beyond the safety of the current harvest. This ambition, while powerful, was shackled to a volatile, quicksilver temper. When things went wrong, Arthur's fury was instantaneous, blinding, and often aimed at those closest to him. His spirit was one of constant building, constantly seeking to outpace the inevitable failures of life. For 40 years, this dynamic held them in a productive, if tense, equilibrium. Elias anchored the farm in history, Arthur pushed it toward the future. Their boundary was the low, ancient wire fence, a skeletal guideline separating the orchards from the grain, easily stepped over, often repaired together. It symbolized a shared heritage more than a division. The rupture began, as profound disasters often do, over something insignificant, a few feet of water and a sluice gate. Arthur, convinced he could engineer a superior distribution system for the summer drought, defied Elias's specific research-backed warnings against disrupting the natural flow of the Willow Creek feeder. Elias had cited the historical records, the soil studies, the evidence. Arthur had retorted with a dismissive wave and the arrogant declaration, "The past is dead. Elias, I live now." The unseasonal autumn deluge was unforgiving. Arthur's hastily laid sluice gate failed, not by a gentle leak, but by an absolute catastrophic breach. The redirected Torrento-Brown, furious tidal wave did not just flood Arthur's new grain field, it sliced directly across the property line and drowned the newest, prize-winning block of heirloom apple saplings in Elias's orchard. 80 young trees, nurtured for 5 years, lay submerged, their fragile branches bowed in watery death. Elias walked through the destruction, ignoring the sucking mud and the devastation to his trousers. He stood over the youngest, most promising sapling, his voice low and devoid of humanity, a pure expression of cold judgment. "You see this, Arthur?" Elias asked, not looking at his brother, but at the drowned tree. "This is what your arrogance costs. You can't stop the rain, but you can choose not to gamble with the foundations. You've always been the same, a brilliant flash followed by the ruin that we, the careful ones, must clean up. You are a threat to the legacy." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. Elias hadn't simply criticized his project, he had condemned his character and his worth. "And you, Elias," Arthur screamed back, his own voice cracking under the emotional weight. "You hide behind your dead journals. You're a jealous, miserable ghost, afraid to ever feel anything new. You only find satisfaction when you prove me wrong. I curse this shared land and your miserable, unforgiving shadow." The exchange was devastating. It was the moment they ceased to be brothers and became adversaries. Elias turned, his expression fixed in an unforgiving mask, and walked away, not looking back at the destruction or at Arthur. Arthur, left alone in the mud, was consumed by a raw, wounded dignity that demanded a permanent defense. The feud did not confine itself to the two brothers. It tore through the fragile structure of their families, forcing the women and children into a silent, prolonged emotional siege. Martha and Elara, the silent bridge. Elias's wife was a quiet, enduring woman who had built her life around the measured, predictable temperament of her husband. She knew Elias was a good man, but she recognized the cold, unforgiving edge of his pride. Elara, Arthur's wife, was all warmth and light, deeply protective of her volatile husband, seeing his fire as passion, not pathology. In the early weeks, when Arthur was feverishly purchasing lumber, Martha and Elara tried to maintain a subtle, secret peace. They had once shared an invisible, daily communication, a wave across the yard, a shouted recipe, a cup of morning coffee on the porch. Now, they were barred from contact, The telephone became their lifeline, a bridge built of desperate words. "He's buying lumber," Martha Elara whispered one evening. The sound of Arthur's hammer, a dull, angry pulse in the background. "Enough for a fortress." "He won't listen to me." "Elias won't speak." Martha sighed, her voice thin. "He just cleans his tools and studies his books. He thinks the higher Arthur builds, the deeper Arthur sinks into shame. He's waiting for surrender." They became conspirators in sorrow, exchanging information about the children, coordinating schedules so their paths wouldn't cross. They maintained a hidden bridge of maternal concern while their husbands built a monument of masculine pride. They traded baked goods in the dead of night, leaving parcels on the back steps, a silent, desperate treaty. Their efforts, however, could not shield the next generation, be Seth and Clara. The crisis point: Seth, Arthur's son, then 9, and Clara, Ilias's daughter. 7 had been true fence children, their childhood defined by easy, free passage. The wall's construction was, to them, a horrifying, inexplicable catastrophe. The initial wall, 8 feet high, was a cruel joke. Seth would lean against his side, Clara against hers, trying to communicate through the muffled sounds. Their shared language of childhood secret codes, whispered plans, shared stories were silenced. The vibrant relationship decayed into lonely resentment. Arthur's building was not careful. He had left gaps near the top posts where the wood didn't quite meet, small, irregular sightlines, like keyholes into a prison. The crisis peaked in the 3rd year. Clara, frustrated by the silence and desperate to retrieve a beloved, lost toy that had rolled under the wall during the feud's early days, attempted to scale a precarious pile of old lumber near the wall to peek over. Seth, hearing her whimpers of effort, rushed to the wall, trying to guide her up, an old hay feeder on his side. In a terrifying, slow-motion disaster, the old lumber pile on Clara's side shifted. She lost her footing and fell, her arm catching painfully on a protruding, splintered plank Arthur had left carelessly exposed. She screamed, a high, sharp sound of genuine pain that instantly cut through the brothers. Emotional fog. The scream pulled both men from their respective houses instantly. They arrived at the wall's base at the same moment, seeing the blood streaming from Clara's arm. The wall, the symbol of their absolute separation, was now the fatal barrier between them and the injured child. Elias, trapped on his side, roared Arthur's name in helpless fury, while Arthur clawed desperately at the nearest plank. Attempting to tear down his own creation, they were forced to run to the ends of the property line, skirting the entire massive structure, losing precious seconds while Clara lay sobbing. It took 5 minutes, 5 agonizing years of regret, compressed into frantic seconds for them. To reach her, Clara was rushed to the clinic with a deep laceration and a fractured forearm. The accident achieved what years of remorse could not. It physically and emotionally decimated the brothers' pride. They stood in the waiting room, side by side, for the first time in 3 years. Their silence now not hostile, but heavy with shared guilt. The wall, built for protection, had instead proven itself to be a weapon of isolation. Arthur returned home the next morning, Clara stabilized but heavily bandaged. He stood before the towering wall, seeing it now not as a shield, but as a monument to his selfishness and almost fatal error. He had to tear it down, but the structure, built with such rage, resisted him. He needed help. That is when Silas, the traveling carpenter, appeared. Arthur, defeated and vulnerable, presented the request for a taller wall. His motivation now, not spite, but a desperate, confusing desire to erase the sight of his failure. Silas, however, did not just bring tools. He brought a unique, philosophical perspective on his trade, what he called the architecture of the soul, a dialogue and deconstruction. When Arthur left for the market, driven by the need to escape the scene, Silas began his measured work. He was not merely a laborer. He was a silent, patient therapist working on wood. He began by deconstructing the wall plank by plank. Elias, watching from his porch, was initially hostile, crossing the dividing line to challenge the stranger. "Who are you? I'll have you arrested for trespass." "That's my brother's folly, and you're compounding it," Elias demanded, his voice sharp. Silas stopped hammering, his face calm and unhurried. "Sir, I am Silas, a carpenter. I was hired to build a structure that would prevent something from crossing this line. The material provided was fine timber, but the client's instructions were flawed." Elias scoffed. "Flawed? My brother wants it taller. He wants isolation." "And what good is isolation, sir?" Silas asked, leaning on the handle of his hammer. "A wall of wood is only wood. It keeps out a neighbor, but it also seals you in with your own thoughts. It creates a vacuum where forgiveness should be. My trade is building structures that support human intent. If the intent is isolation, I build a barrier." If the intent is connection, I build a path. The wood is merely the medium. Elias was stunned by the carpenter's audacity, his clear-eyed assessment of the situation. And what do you think Arthur's intent is now? Silas motioned to the tools. The fee he paid me was generous, sir. It was meant to buy absolute separation. But the look in his eyes, the frantic, wasted energy of his spirit, it told me he wasn't trying to keep you out, but to lock himself in with his guilt. The true need here is not to keep things out, but to find a safe way back in. Silas then pointed to the stack of new, pristine pine lumber Arthur had purchased. Arthur bought the material for a prison, but I intend to use it to build a sanctuary, a path back to common ground. Elias retreated, shaken. He spent the rest of the day watching Silas from the window, his critical eyes seeking flaws in the carpenter's technique, but finding none. Silas's labor was slow, perfect, and infused with a meditative rhythm. The geometry of reconciliation. Silas was indeed building an architecture of atonement. He was not merely joining two points of land, he was joining two estranged memories. He chose the archaic shape of tension and release, of shared load-bearing. He chose the smooth handrail inviting the touch, allowing a gentle glide into the future. He made the incline slight, symbolizing that the path to peace is not a desperate climb, but a gentle approach. He utilized the best of the new pine for the structural integrity, but he incorporated small, visible sections of the scarred cedar from the old wall into the base supports. This was his subtle, final message. The foundation of your future must acknowledge the wounds of your past. When the bridge was structurally complete, Silas carved the two benches from the old wallwood and placed them on the periphery benches for meeting, not for working. The entire design spoke of one thing: the work of building is over, the work of being begins now. The bridge's completion marked the beginning, not the end, of the difficult work. Clara's arm healed, leaving only a small scar, a visible reminder of the wall's violence. Seth and Clara ran across the bridge daily, their ease a joyful rebuke to their father's folly. The rebuilding of trust. The community, however, remained skeptical. The feuding Viridian brothers had been a source of dark amusement and gossip for years. The sudden, silent appearance of the bridge, and the sight of Elias and Arthur sharing a cider press, raised suspicions. It won't last, muttered old man Hemlock at the general store. Two bulls like that don't change their nature over a piece of wood. The brothers understood that they had to rebuild the bridge of civic trust. They actively dismantled the cynicism by performing acts of communal service together. They replaced the crumbling bridge over Willow Creek that served the local school. They organized a shared harvest festival, inviting the entire town, an event unthinkable during the years of the war. Humbled, learned to temper his impulsive ideas, submitting his plans to Elias's measured critique. Elias, softened by the memory of his daughter's near accident and the depth of his own stubborn isolation, learned to praise Arthur's creativity and embrace calculated risk. The farm flourished, reaching heights of productivity they had never achieved when separated. The enduring architecture in their final years. Elias and Arthur spent their evenings sitting on the two benches at the periphery of the bridge. They would often tell the story to their grandchildren, always emphasizing the same 2 points: the effort of the wall. It took a mighty effort to build that wall, Arthur would say, but it took no courage. It was the easy path, the defensive path. The wall gave us nothing but a reason to stay angry. The effort of the bridge. The bridge was built with the same wood, the same tools, and the same effort, Elias would add, but it required a shift in intention. It required the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to acknowledge that the other side of the chasm was necessary for your own completeness. The bridge, now weathered and worn, became the heart of the Viridian lands. It was the ultimate architectural lesson. Walls are built when we prioritize being right. Bridges are built when we prioritize being together. The legacy of the bridge was not merely the joining of two farms, but the radical redefinition of the Viridian character, a tradition of not just careful planting, but of careful connection, built on the enduring foundation of forgiveness.